The wine felt like acid on her tongue. Elara held the crystal goblet with hands that did not tremble, a small, hard-won victory in a war she was perpetually losing. Around her, the great hall of Silverwood Keep thrummed with the forced gaiety of her sister's betrothal feast. Laughter, sharp and glittering as shattered glass, echoed from the high, vaulted ceilings. Every note of it felt like a stone thrown at her. Her sister, Lyra, was the center of this glittering universe, a vision in crimson silk, her laughter the loudest, her smile the brightest. She was a high-born Omega, destined for a great match, and she had found one in the pompous, fleshy Lord Perran. Elara, also an Omega, was her shadow, the pale, quiet thing that followed in her wake, a testament to the gods' inconsistent blessings. "Oh, Elara, do try to look less like a frightened mouse." Lyra's voice cut through the din, laced with that familiar, saccharine cruelty. "You will curdle the wine." Heads turned. A ripple of snickers spread through the nearby tables. Elara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a treacherous blush that betrayed the calm she fought so hard to maintain. She did not look at her sister. She focused on the intricate patterns carved into the dark wood of the table, tracing the lines of a mythical beast with her eyes. To look at Lyra would be to give her the satisfaction she craved. "She is simply overwhelmed by your happiness, my love," Lord Perran boomed, his hand possessively on Lyra's shoulder. "Not all are so fortunate." The pity was worse than the scorn. It coated her skin, slick and foul. Elara took a slow, deliberate sip of the acidic wine, the burn in her throat a welcome distraction from the burning in her heart. She had learned long ago that silence was her only shield. Words were weapons, and she was woefully unarmed in this glittering, vicious court. Her worth had been measured against her sister's from the day she was born, and she had always been found wanting. Quieter, paler, less. From his throne of obsidian and ice, King Kaelin watched the proceedings with an unnerving stillness. His kingdom, Eridor, was a realm of sharp peaks and shadowed valleys, a land shaped by the cold that seemed to emanate from the king himself. He was the Alpha of Alphas, a ruler whose power was absolute, whose word was law, and whose heart was rumored to be carved from the same glacier that fed the kingdom's frozen rivers. For 300 years, he had sat upon that throne. He had seen empires rise and fall, seen generations of his subjects live and die. And through it all, he had felt nothing. A vast, empty silence reigned within him, a cold so profound it had long ago ceased to be a sensation and had become the very essence of his being. It was his curse, the frost-bound heart. A vengeful sorceress, spurned by his ancestor, had laid the curse upon his bloodline. It did not kill. It hollowed. It froze emotion at its source, leaving only a dull, intellectual approximation of feeling. It leached warmth from his body, leaving his skin cool to the touch, and it wove tendrils of ice into his soul. Any flicker of genuine emotion, anger, joy, grief, was met with a vicious backlash, a physical agony, as the frost within him fought to reclaim its dominion. So he had learned not to feel. He had perfected the art of emptiness. His court feared him. His advisors respected his cold, brutal logic. But no one knew him. No one saw the prisoner inside the king, the man who longed for a single moment of warmth, a single, genuine connection. Even as he knew it would destroy him, he was attending this betrothal feast in a vassal territory as a political necessity. It was a tedious affair, full of grasping lords and simpering ladies. He observed them as he might observe a colony of insects, their passions and dramas small and distant. His gaze swept the hall, indifferent, until it snagged on a point of stillness in the swirling chaos. A young woman, seated near the edge of the high table. She was pale, with hair the color of spun moonlight, and she held herself with a quiet dignity that was a stark contrast to the performative revelry around her. He watched as her sister, the garish bride-to-be, flung a cruel remark at her. He saw the blush that stained her cheeks, but he also saw the unyielding strength in her spine. She did not cower. She did not weep. She simply endured, her silence a fortress. And then, something impossible happened. Deep within the frozen cavern of his chest, something stirred. It was not a feeling, not yet. It was the barest tremor, the faintest pre-echo of a sensation, like the groan of a glacier shifting after centuries of stillness. The curse within him, a sentient, malevolent cold, recoiled. It did not understand this. This quiet Omega girl posed no threat. Yet, his ancient primal wolf, buried under layers of ice, lifted its head for the first time in a century. It recognized something. A scent no one else could detect, summer rain. Sun-warmed earth. The choosing ceremony was a tradition as old as the kingdom itself. Once every decade, the unmarried alphas and omegas of the nobility gathered, and alliances were forged. This year was different. This year, the reclusive Alpha King himself had announced he would attend. It was said he sought a queen. The news had sent the noble houses into a frenzy. Lyra was certain she would be the one. She stood preening at the front of the assembly, her gown a confection of gold and cream. "He will surely choose me," she had whispered to Elara that morning, her voice dripping with smug certainty. "And you will be my lady in waiting. You can fetch my slippers and try not to trip over your own feet." Elara stood in the back as always. She wore a simple dress of pale blue, the color of a winter sky. She expected nothing. She was invisible, and in her invisibility she had found a strange sort of peace. She watched as King Kalan entered the chamber. The air grew colder. A hush fell over the crowd, a silence born of fear and awe. He moved with a predatory grace, his dark hair a stark contrast to his pale skin. His eyes, the color of a frozen sea, swept the room. They held no warmth, no interest. They were the eyes of a being who had seen too much and felt too little. He passed by the hopeful faces, the offered smiles, the trembling hands. He passed by Lyra, whose confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His gaze found Elara in the shadows. For the second time, that strange tremor went through him. His wolf was awake now, alert, focused entirely on her. It did not care for titles or beauty or dowries. It cared only for the impossible scent of summer that clung to her, a scent that promised an end to the endless winter. The curse shrieked a silent warning in his mind. Danger. This one is danger. For the first time in his long life, Kalan ignored it. He walked directly to where she stood. The crowd parted before him, their whispers dying in their throats. He stopped in front of her. She was small and had to crane her neck to look up at him. She was not afraid. He saw surprise in her wide, silver eyes, but not fear. It was astonishing. Everyone feared him. He extended a hand, his fingers were long and pale, and a faint mist seemed to cling to them. He did not speak. He could not. The words he wanted to say were trapped behind a wall of ice. "I choose you." The intent was all he could offer. Elara stared at his outstretched hand. This could not be happening. It was a mistake. A cruel joke. She glanced at Lyra, whose face was a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. Then she looked back at the king. He was waiting. The entire world was waiting. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His skin was cold. Not the simple cold of a winter's day, but a deep, profound cold that seemed to sink into her bones. It should have been alarming. Instead, a strange wave of empathy washed over her. This was not the cold of a cruel heart. It was the cold of a deep and terrible loneliness. He closed his fingers around hers, and then, before the entire stunned court, he lifted her hand to his lips. He did not kiss it. He simply held it there for a moment, his cold breath ghosting over her skin. It was not a gesture of passion. It was a claim, a declaration, final and absolute. The shadow-veiled citadel was a fortress of black stone and silence. It rose from the mountainside like a shard of frozen night, its towers piercing a sky that was perpetually grey. This was Elara's new home. She had been taken from her family's keep without so much as a chance to pack a bag. A silent procession of the king's royal guard escorting her to the capital. Lyra had not said goodbye. She had only watched, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. The castle was as cold as its master. The air was still and frigid. The fires in the great hearths seemed to give off light, but no warmth. And the servants moved like ghosts, their footfalls swallowed by thick tapestries depicting grim historical battles. They were polite, but distant, their eyes holding the same fearful reverence they showed the king. Elara was given a suite of rooms larger than her entire family home. They were opulent, furnished with dark woods, rich velvets, and silver ornaments that glittered in the dim light. But they were cold. The chill seeped from the stone walls, from the marble floors, from the very air she breathed. And the king, he was a constant, silent presence. He did not summon her. He did not speak to her, but she felt his eyes on her. When she walked in the desolate, frost-covered gardens, she would see his silhouette in a high window. When she sat in the vast library, surrounded by thousands of books, she would feel a shift in the air and know he was standing in the shadows of the doorway. He was watching her, studying her, a scientist observing a strange and inexplicable specimen. She was not afraid. She was curious and lonely. The silence of the castle was a heavier burden than the scorn of her sister's court. Here, there was nothing to push against. There was only the vast, echoing emptiness and the cold, watchful eyes of her husband. She was a queen in name, but a prisoner in reality. A gilded bird in a very cold cage. One afternoon, as she was trying to read a book whose pages felt brittle with cold, an elderly servant entered her chambers. She was carrying a tray with a steaming cup. The woman's name was Anya, and she was one of the few staff members whose eyes held a flicker of warmth. "I thought you might be chilled, Your Majesty," Anya said, her voice a soft, comforting murmur. "This is spiced cider, an old recipe. It warms the bones." Elara looked at the woman, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, Anya. That is very kind." Anya hesitated, her hands twisting in her apron. "If I may be so bold, Your Majesty, do not mistake the king's silence for indifference. The fortress has stood for 1,000 years. Its walls are thick." It was a cryptic statement, but Elara understood. It was a warning and a reassurance. The court antagonist arrived in the form of Lord Valerius, the king's chief advisor. He was a tall, severe man with eyes like chips of flint and a mouth that seemed permanently set in a thin line of disapproval. He had served the king's father and his father before him. He viewed himself as the true steward of the kingdom's stability. He requested an audience with Elara one evening. He did not bow deeply. His respect was a thin veneer over a core of rigid condescension. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice as dry as old parchment, "I feel it is my duty to advise you on your new position. The king is a man of singular focus. He is not given to frivolities or sentiment. The role of Queen of Eridor is one of decorum and duty, not of affection. I understand my duty, Lord Valerius, Ilara replied, her voice even. She would not be intimidated by this man. I'm not certain you do, he countered, his tone sharpening slightly. You are an outsider. A surprising choice. The king's judgment is, of course, absolute, but his decisions can have unforeseen consequences. The stability of the kingdom rests upon a delicate balance. A disruption to that balance would be unfortunate. The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. He was telling her she did not belong, that she was a mistake, a disruption. He was the guardian of the king's isolation, and he saw her as a threat to the cold, predictable order he had so carefully maintained. Ilara met his gaze, her own clear and unwavering. The king chose me, my lord, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I suggest you learn to accept his decision, for the sake of the kingdom's stability. Valerius's eyes narrowed. He had expected a frightened girl he could easily manipulate. He had not expected this quiet, unshakable strength. He gave a stiff, formal bow and departed, leaving a palpable chill in his wake. Ilara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she had just made a powerful enemy. Months bled into a year, then 2, then 3. The routine of the castle became her life. The silence, the cold, the ever-present but distant figure of her husband. She read every book in the library. She learned the names of every servant. She walked every path in the frozen gardens. She spoke to Kaelin only at formal dinners, stilted exchanges about the weather or the price of grain, with Lord Valerius always watching from his seat nearby. The loneliness was a physical weight. Some nights it was so heavy she could barely breathe. She would curl up in her vast, cold bed and weep, her tears the only source of warmth in the oppressive chill. She cried for the life she had lost, for the connection she craved, for the silent, haunted man who was her husband. She had seen past his cold exterior to the suffering beneath, and her heart ached for him. But she did not know how to reach him. The walls were too high, the ice too thick. Kaelin saw it all. He stood on his balcony, which overlooked her chambers, and he watched her window night after night. He could not feel her sorrow in his own heart, but he could see it. He could recognize the slump of her shoulders, the way her light seemed to dim a little more each day. And it caused a reaction in him that was dangerously close to an emotion. An agonizing, helpless rage. The curse thrived on his inaction. As long as he kept his distance, it was a quiet, manageable cold. But the sight of her pain, it made him want to shatter the walls of his self-imposed prison. It made him want to go to her, to hold her, to tell her everything. And the mere thought of it sent shards of ice piercing through his veins. So he found another way. He could not speak the words. He could not offer the touch. But he could write. Every night that he saw the telltale flicker of a single candle burning late in her room, every night he knew she was awake and alone. He would retreat to his study. He would take out a heavy sheet of vellum, dip his quill in ink, and he would write to her. He wrote of the first time he saw her, of the quiet strength that had called to him across a crowded hall. He wrote of his admiration for her courage in the face of her sister's cruelty. He wrote of the way the moonlight caught in her hair when she walked in the garden. He described the endless, frozen winter of his soul, and how she, in her simple, unassuming existence, was the first hint of spring he had known in 300 years. He poured every thought, every observation, every forbidden, nascent feeling onto the page. He wrote of his frustration, his loneliness, his desperate, hopeless love for her. He never signed them. He simply folded them, sealed them with plain wax, and placed them in a heavy, iron-bound box he kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his study. 3 years. nearly 1,000 letters. A silent testament to a love that could not be spoken. A king's secret heart, committed to ink and paper. One night, the cold was worse than ever. A blizzard raged outside the citadel, but the storm within Kalen was far more violent. He had watched Elara at dinner. She had looked so pale, so fragile. She had barely eaten a bite. Lord Valerius had made a subtle, cutting remark about the southern territories and their delicate constitutions, and Kalen had seen the flicker of pain in her eyes before she had masked it. The urge to rise, to cross the room, to freeze the very blood in Valerius's veins had been so strong that the curse had retaliated with blinding force. Pain, white-hot and ice-cold at once, had seized him. He had managed to keep his composure, to rise and exit the dining hall with measured steps, but the moment he was out of sight, he had collapsed against a stone wall, gasping as the frost spread visibly across the stones where his hand rested. Elara had seen it. She had seen the infinitesimal tightening of his jaw, the flash of something akin to agony in his eyes. She had seen the frost bloom on the stone. Everyone else was oblivious, but she saw him. She always saw him. Ignoring the whispers of the court, she excused herself and followed the path he had taken. She found him in the grand orrery, a vast, circular room with a domed ceiling painted with constellations. He was standing in the center of the room, one hand braced against the central brass model of the solar system. He was fighting for control, his body rigid, his breathing harsh. The brass beneath his hand was white, with a thick layer of rime. She did not approach him with pity. She did not ask if he was all right. She walked toward him until she was only a few feet away, her presence a quiet anchor in his storm. "It must be so lonely," she said, her voice soft but clear in the echoing chamber. He froze. No one had ever said that to him. They asked about the kingdom, about taxes, about war. They spoke of duty and law. No one had ever dared to speak to the man. No one had ever looked at him and seen not a king, not a figure of power, but a lonely soul. He turned his head slowly, his frozen sea eyes fixing on her. He saw genuine empathy in her face. Not pity, not fear, a simple, profound understanding that cut through 3 centuries of ice. "Why are you in so much pain?" she asked. Not a command, a request, an invitation to share a burden he had carried alone for longer than she had been alive. Something inside him broke, a crack in the glacier. The words, locked away for centuries, came pouring out. He spoke of the curse, of the frost-bound heart. He told her of the endless, silent emptiness, the numbness that was his constant companion. He told her how any strong emotion brought agony, how the ice fought to reclaim him, to extinguish any spark of warmth. He confessed that his coldness, his distance, was not a choice. It was a cage, a necessity for survival, and he told her that her presence in his castle was the most exquisite torture he had ever endured, for she made him want to feel again. He finished, the words hanging in the frigid air between them. He expected her to recoil, to look at him with fear or disgust, to see him as a monster. Instead, she took a step closer. She looked at his hand, still pressed against the frosted brass. Slowly, she reached out and laid her own hand over his. Her skin was so warm. The contrast was a shock, a jolt that was both pain and pleasure. He flinched, expecting the icy backlash, but it was muted. Her warmth seemed to be fighting it, soothing it. "You are not a monster, Kalen," she whispered, using his name for the first time. "You are a prisoner, and you have been alone for far too long." In that moment, he felt it, a true, undeniable flicker of warmth in the center of his chest. It was not the memory of a feeling. It was the thing itself. Hope and it was the most terrifying, most wonderful sensation he had ever known. That night, Elara could not sleep. His confession replayed in her mind, a heartbreaking revelation that recontextualized every silent dinner, every watchful glance, every cold corridor. It was not rejection. It was protection. He was not ignoring her, he was shielding her from his own curse. A restless energy filled her. She felt drawn to his study, the one place in the castle she had never dared to enter. She found the door unlocked. The room was dark, dominated by a massive desk of dark wood. A fire, giving no heat, flickered in the hearth. The room was a reflection of him, orderly, silent, and cold. She ran a hand along his desk, trying to feel some connection to him. Her foot caught on the edge of the rug, and she stumbled, her hand knocking a heavy inkwell to the floor. As she knelt to write it, her fingers brushed against a loose floorboard. Curiosity, a force stronger than propriety, compelled her. She lifted it. Beneath it lay a large iron-bound chest. It was not locked. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she lifted the heavy lid. It was filled to the brim with letters. Hundreds of them. All sealed with plain wax. All addressed to her. She took one from the top, her hands trembling. The date on it was from the week she had arrived at the citadel 3 years ago. She broke the seal. To the queen in the blue dress, it began. The handwriting was stark and elegant. Today you walked in the West Garden. You stopped to look at the statue of the first queen, the one whose face has been worn smooth by centuries of snow. You traced the line of her crown with your finger. You looked so small in that vast, empty garden. I wanted to tell you the statue's story. I wanted to tell you that you possess a grace the stone could never capture. But I stood at my window and said nothing. Saying nothing is the only thing I am permitted to do. To speak would be to invite the storm. Tears welled in her eyes. She grabbed another. This one dated a year later. You cried last night. I saw the light from your window. I know it was the anniversary of your mother's passing. I remember you mentioning it to your handmaiden. The urge to go to you, to offer some word of comfort, was a physical force. The frost crept up the walls of my chamber in response. I am a king of a vast domain, and I was defeated by a single, heartfelt desire. This curse does not just freeze my heart, it forges the bars of my cage. And you, my queen, are the beautiful, impossible world on the other side. She read on, pulling letter after letter from the box. They were a secret history of their 3 years together. He had seen everything, her loneliness, her quiet acts of kindness to the staff, her strength against Valerius's barbs, her love of the ancient books in the library. He had chronicled it all. He had loved her through it all. Silently, powerlessly, completely, the final letter she pulled was from the previous night after his confession in the orrery. Elara, for the first time, I write your name. Tonight, you touched me. You looked at me, and you did not see a king or a curse. You saw me. You have undone me, you brave, beautiful woman. You have planted a seed of hope in this frozen wasteland. I am terrified it will not survive the winter. And I am even more terrified that it will. She sank to the floor, the letters spread around her like fallen leaves, and she wept. But these were not the tears of loneliness she had cried for 3 years. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking, world-altering love. He was not a cold, distant king. He was her Kaelin, and she would not let him remain a prisoner for 1 moment longer. Armed with this new understanding, Elara's demeanor changed. She sought him out. She began taking her meals with him in his private dining room, ignoring the disapproving glares of Lord Valerius. She did not chatter or fill the silence with noise. Instead, she simply existed with him, her calm presence a balm. She would read to him in the evenings, her voice weaving stories of ancient heroes and sun-drenched lands, a stark contrast to the ever-present chill of the castle. Kaelan found himself living for these moments. Her voice was warmth. Her presence was light. The hope that had taken root in his chest began to grow. A fragile, tender green shoot pushing its way through permafrost. He started to feel again, in tiny, dangerous increments. The scent of the old books she read, the faint melody of her humming as she walked. Each small sensation was a miracle, and each one came with a price. One evening, she was reading a tale of a knight and a dragon. She reached a poignant passage, her voice softening. Kaelan, lost in the moment, felt a genuine wave of affection for her, so pure and strong it stole his breath. He reached out, his fingers tracing the air just inches from her cheek, wanting desperately to touch her. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. The curse, sensing the true threat of this burgeoning emotion, lashed out with all its ancient power. A wave of intense cold exploded from him. The fire in the hearth was extinguished in a hiss of steam. A thick, branching pattern of frost spread like lightning across the floor, racing toward Elara. Kaelan cried out, a sound of pure agony, and collapsed, clutching his chest. The hope was too much. The warmth was a poison the curse was trying to violently expel. Elara rushed to his side, ignoring the biting cold radiating from his body. His skin was like ice, his lips blue. His breathing was shallow, ragged. Kaelan, she cried, her voice laced with panic. Lord Valerius swept into the room, his face a grim mask. "Get away from him, Your Majesty," he commanded, his voice sharp. "You are making it worse. He needs help." She insisted, refusing to move. "He needs what he has always needed, quiet." "Isolation," Valerius said, his eyes hard. "Your presence, your sentimentality, is agitating the ancient laws that keep him stable. You are killing him with your kindness." The words were a physical blow, but a spark of defiance ignited within her. Anya's words came back to her. The fortress has stood for 1,000 years. Its walls are thick. Valerius wasn't protecting Kaelan. He was protecting the fortress. He was protecting the curse. Over the next few days, Kaelan's condition deteriorated. He was confined to his bed, trapped in a state between waking and sleeping, his body racked with tremors. The frost was winning. It was consuming him from the inside out. The castle grew colder still, the very stones seeming to weep with icy condensation. Elara refused to leave his side. She sat by his bed, holding his frigid hand, whispering to him, reading to him, pouring all of her desperate hope and love into the silent room. On the third day, Lord Valerius entered the bedchamber, flanked by 2 of the royal guard. "This has gone on long enough," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You will be escorted back to your family estate. Your presence here is a danger to the king." "No," Elara said, rising to her feet. "I will not leave him. It is not a request." Valerius's facade of civility finally crumbled, revealing the cold ambition beneath. "I am the steward of this kingdom. I will not see it fall because of the king's sentimental folly. The curse maintains order. It keeps him strong, decisive, unburdened by emotion. You threaten that order." Suddenly, it all clicked into place. "You don't want it broken," she whispered, horrified. "You want him to remain like this." A cruel smile touched Valerius's lips. "The sorceress who cast the curse was my ancestor. My family has served this throne for centuries, ensuring the curse holds. It is our legacy, our power. We are the wardens of the king's winter. And you, little Omega, are an unexpected spring thaw, a threat to be eliminated. He gestured to the guards. "Take her." As the guards moved toward her, a primal fear for Kaelin's life, coupled with a righteous fury, erupted within Elara. Something deep inside her, something she never knew she possessed, awoke, a dormant power passed down through her own lineage, a line of Sun Omegas whose innate warmth was the curse's natural antithesis. A wave of brilliant golden light and palpable heat exploded from her. It was not fire, it was pure life, pure warmth. The guards recoiled, shielding their eyes. The frost on the windows melted in an instant, water streaming down the panes. The room, for the first time, felt warm. Valerius stared, his composure shattered. "What? What are you?" "I am his wife," Elara declared, her voice ringing with a power she had never known. "I am his queen, and you will not harm him." She turned back to Kaelin. He was groaning, his body convulsing as the two forces, the ancient ice of the curse and the sudden, intense warmth of her power, warred within him. She knew, with chilling certainty, that she had a choice. She could use this newfound power to strike down Valerius, to claim her vengeance for his centuries of cold-hearted manipulation, or she could pour every ounce of it into Kaelin, to save him, with no guarantee of success. There was no choice at all. Vengeance was a cold comfort. Love was a sun. She placed her hands on his chest. She closed her eyes and focused, not on fighting the ice, but on filling the emptiness. She thought of his letters. She thought of his silent vigil at his window. She thought of his loneliness. She poured all her love, all her warmth, all her light into him. It was not a battle. It was a homecoming. She was giving him back the summer he had been denied for so long. A blinding light filled the room. Kaelin arched his back, a terrible, guttural scream tearing from his throat, a sound of both agony and release. The ice that had sheathed the furniture and walls shattered, turning to mist and vanishing. The air grew warm, fragrant with the impossible scent of summer blossoms. When the light faded, Elara collapsed. Spent, Kaelin lay still, breathing deeply and evenly for the first time. She looked at her hand. His skin, beneath her palm, was warm. Tears of relief streamed down her face. Lord Valerius, his face pale with shock and defeat, was apprehended by the stunned but loyal guards. His power, so intrinsically linked to the curse, was broken. He was just a man now. A bitter, defeated man. When Kaelin awoke, the first thing he felt was the warmth of the sunlight streaming through the window. The real warmth. He felt the softness of the furs beneath him, the weight of the blanket over him. He felt the steady, rhythmic beat of his own heart, no longer a muffled drum beneath layers of ice. And he felt a profound, aching love for the woman sleeping in the chair beside his bed, her hand resting on his. He sat up, his movements fluid and easy. He felt alive. He reached out and gently touched Elara's cheek. Her skin was soft. He could feel the warmth of it, the life. He could feel. The wonder of it was so immense it brought tears to his eyes. Real, warm tears. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She saw him, truly saw him, and a radiant smile lit up her face. "Kaelin, Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotions he was feeling for the first time. Gratitude, awe, a love so vast it filled every part of him that had once been empty. "You saved me. You saved yourself," she whispered. "You just needed someone to show you the way home." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time their embrace was one of pure warmth. It was not a claim or a comfort. It was a union. His lips found hers, and the kiss was not the cold press of a king's duty, but the passionate, desperate, joyful meeting of two souls who had found each other across a winter of loneliness. The citadel thawed, under the warmth of a king who could finally feel, and a queen who was his living son. The frost-bitten gardens began to bloom with impossible, vibrant flowers. Laughter and music, for the first time in centuries, echoed in the halls. The staff, who had lived in fear, now served with genuine loyalty and affection. The entire kingdom of Eredor seemed to sigh in relief, the oppressive chill lifting from the very land itself. Their wedding was held a month later, not as a political alliance, but as a true celebration of love. Elara stood beside Kaelin, not as his shadow, but as his equal, his radiant partner. He declared his love for her before the entire court, his voice clear and strong, filled with a warmth that reached every corner of the great hall. 3 months later, Elara sat with Kaelin on a sun-drenched balcony overlooking the now lush palace gardens. He was reading to her, his hand resting possessively on her slightly rounding belly. A servant brought them a single letter, delivered from her old home. It was from Lyra. Elara opened it. The letter was full of stilted, grudging apologies. Lord Perrin had proven to be a faithless and cruel husband, and Lyra's life was not the glittering prize she had imagined. She begged for Elara's forgiveness, for a place at the royal court, for a taste of the happiness she now so clearly possessed. Elara read the letter, her expression calm. The words, which once would have brought a surge of triumph or pity, now felt distant, like an echo from another life. She was no longer the frightened mouse her sister had tormented. She was a queen, a wife, a mother-to-be. She was loved. She looked at Kaelin, who was watching her, his eyes full of love and concern. She smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. She folded the letter, and without a second thought, let it fall from her fingers. It drifted on the warm breeze, tumbling down into the blooming roses below. A final, forgotten piece of a winter that was gone forever. Her past no longer had any power over her. Her future was here, warm and bright, in the arms of the king who had written his love for her in the dark, waiting for the dawn.